These men of past were undoubtedly seafaring people, explorers, and brave warriors. But what secrets did they hide, and why their image is so greatly distorted today? Stay to the end to find out. In today's journey through history, we're setting sail to explore the fascinating world of the Vikings. Get ready to be amazed as we uncover 23 astonishing facts about these legendary warriors, traders, and explorers. From their fearless conquests to their rich cultural heritage, the Vikings left an indelible mark on the pages of history. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell to join us on our quest for knowledge. Number 1. Where did they come from? The Vikings were northern tribal people who existed from the 7th to the 11th century, primarily in what is now Denmark, Norway, and Sweden. The word Viking itself has several explanations or translations. According to some, it means a pirate, and according to others, it means people coming from the fjords or the north. At their height, their crusades went as far as the Caspian Sea and North America. Number 2. Swords. The most elite Viking fighters had swords of alloy, which remains a real mystery even to modern scholars. The metal was so strong and pure that according to the Viking methods, it could have been impossible. These swords were distinguished by the inscription Ulfbert, and contained 3 times as much carbon as others from the same age. They literally were 800 years ahead of their time. Number 3. Helmets with horns. When we say Vikings, everyone imagines this. But in reality, no single Viking helmet with horns has been ever found. This whole fallacy comes from the 18th century when the composer Richard Wagner presented his opera, The Ring of the Nibelung, based on Norse mythology. The costume designer simply created horned helmets for the Viking characters in his play. And so the persistent stereotype was born. However, it is all incorrect. Here's what their helmets looked like. Number 4. Hygiene. In movies, we always see the Vikings dirty and bloody from another battle, pouring wine over their beards in another feast, and throwing themselves on the bed straight after that. It makes us doubt their hygiene habits seriously, and they are often labeled as complete savages. The truth turns out to be quite different. For the time, they had impeccable hygiene. In excavation of Viking sites, tweezers, razors, combs, and ear cleaners have been found. Also, Vikings took a shower at least once a week. By the way, that was much more often than other European nations of that time. Archaeological excavations prove that the Vikings even often visited the sauna. Number 5. Fire. Did you know that the Vikings had a rather cunning but also a bit nasty way of carrying fire with them? Instead of wondering each time how to light a new one in the wet and cold lands, they gathered wood mushrooms to put them in a cauldron full of urine, and boiled them for several days. A thick mixture was made and then dried out. The sodium nitrate contained in urine allowed the material to smolder instead of burn, so they could carry the fire with them for days. Number 6. Funerals. Yes, there were funerals in so typical long boats lit with arrows. But they were reserved only for the bravest warriors, or people of great status and wealth in the community. They were laid in ships surrounded by weapons, valuables, and sometimes even sacrificial slaves. Often slaves were put into the boats alive but drugged, so they would not panic when the fire was lit. In most cases, after death the commoners were put in the ground or into a mound. If you want to constantly learn interesting facts like these, subscribe to the channel. It's simple. Number 7. Slaves. A moment ago, I mentioned slaves, and that's right, the Vikings actively traded in slaves. And the ones kept to serve them were given the strangest names, most often related to the way they looked or even how they smelled. For example, bad breath, fatty, sticky, and so on. Number 8. Women. Unlike slaves, Viking women enjoyed unusual freedom, especially compared to women of other cultures at the time. They could own property and even ask for a divorce. Women usually married young, between 12 and 15. Naturally, marriages were arranged, but women's wishes in the marriage were also considered. Some possessed quite a high status in society. One of the most magnificent burials discovered to date is of a woman, buried in a lavishly decorated ship with an awful lot of valuable objects. Number 9. Were all Vikings warriors? Did you know that the majority of Vikings were farmers and stockmen? I may disappoint some of you, but in fact, most of them were master farmers. and did not participate in campaigns and plundering at all. Number 10. Winter entertainment. The Vikings skied regularly, but they also enjoyed sledding and ice skating. Numerous items of this kind were found next to buried Vikings. The most famous pair of Viking skates date back to the 9th century. They even had something like gods of skiing named Skadi and Ullr. Number 11. Gods. Viking mythology is quite complex and confusing, but generally we all know about their gods. We know about Odin, his son, Thor. Well, Hollywood has made sure we could recognize their images even if in an exaggerated way. They had a sun god Balder who was one of the most important deities. Tyr, on the other hand, was called the god of war and had also a significant presence in prayers. Number 12. Blondes. Many Vikings were red-headed, however everyone wanted to be blonde. So even men regularly dyed their hair. They used quite strong soap with high lye content to bleach hair and beards. This practice was also extremely useful against lice, for example. Number 13. Rides. The Vikings were terribly resourceful in their rides. And at one time they bothered almost all European coastlines. They came entirely from the sea, plundered settlements, took slaves, and disappeared before states' armies could react. In general, they were skillful sailors, and made it all the way to North America 500 years before Columbus. Number 14. Berserkers. The fiercest warriors who entered battles first were called Berserkers. They fought with absolute fury in a trance-like state, which was probably partially induced by alcohol or some intoxicants. According to some scholars, the opiates in question were made from hallucinogenic mushrooms. Others claim that the Vikings simply went into battle drunk. Number 15. Social classes. At the top are earls, counts, and kings, sort of Viking nobles. They owned vast territories and land, quantities of livestock. Most Vikings belonged to the Carls, the middle class also known as freemen. And finally come the thralls, slaves who did all the black work in Viking society. Number 16. Codex Regius. Translated, Words of the High Person. These are moral laws and rules given by Odin himself. Here are some of them. If an uninvited person enters your house, you can safely kill him without any warning. It also says that the most precious baggage is reason, and a wise man knows the measure in drinking. That fact that Odin pays special attention to drink and alcohol in his speech is not at all accidental. The insatiable thirst for drink of the Vikings is well known from historical evidence. Vikings discussed all important topics at the table while drinking, from selling property to plans of attack. Number 17. Viking soup. Bloody skirmishes took a large part in Vikings' life. Viking women had a special way of judging exactly how deep and bad a wound was. They gave the wounded a strong broth of leeks, onion, and herbs. After the Viking drank that soup, women would approach the wound and smell it. And if they smelled the broth through it, then the wound itself was already far too deep and bad. Thus, they could foretell that the warrior wouldn't get well, as they thought death was near. Generally, this method had some reasoning, especially if the wound was in the abdominal area. If the soup scent appeared, the wound was probably really bad. Number 18. Tranquility tax. Did you know the mafia's favorite tax or fee was invented by the Vikings? The practice of tranquility tax dates to the 10th century, when the English and French were forced to pay huge sums of money to the Vikings, just to leave them alone. Vikings used to receive huge sums in silver from each kingdom, amounting to somewhat 20 tons of the precious metal. Number 19. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. If a Viking was killed, his relatives had legal right to take the killer's life. Another way of settling scores was something like a duel fought to death. However, a third person, external to the dispute, could be involved, as a volunteer. If you didn't show up for the duel, you were in for the ultimate shame. In Viking society, dignity and honor were elevated to a cult. The most honorable thing to them was to die in a battle. Number 20. Lack of pleasure is divorce. As I mentioned earlier, marriage among the Vikings was not till death. Divorce could be sought for multiple reasons. One of them was if the husband, for example, was a weak lover. Society even sided with the woman who in that case asked for a divorce. The whole process of divorce was done in stages and rather awkwardly. First, it had to be announced in the marriage lodge, then a note was put on the front door that such a thing was happening, and third and final step, the divorce was announced in front of the whole village. A shame all round. However, men could also ask for divorce for the same reasons. There was another tradition of sword against infidelity. So better go for divorce. Number 21. Blood Eagle. This practice, shown in the popular series, The Vikings, reveals details surrounding its performance. The ribs are separated from the chest, pulled to the sides along with the skin, to form a sort of eagle, a disgusting sight. The bloody eagle was a method of ritual execution. However, the ritual is described only in 2 sources in Norse literature. Both executions for killing a father. Whether the whole thing really happened, however, scholars are still arguing. Number 22. Viking Compass. Since the Vikings traveled a lot, they often needed good navigation. A wooden disc discovered by scientists is the only surviving specimen of their peculiar sundial compass. This compass allowed them to navigate even when the sun was over the horizon. To find the sun after sunset, the Vikings used sunstones, a version of calcite with double refraction of the rays, which helped them find their way. Scientists today calculate that the compass gives an error of only 4 degrees, which was pretty accurate for its time. Number 23. Vikings and Clothing. In the icy northern winters, bird down was widely used in quilts filling, for example. However, some scholars believe they did that with clothing as well. It could be said that the Vikings used something like our down jackets in cold winters. Huge amounts of bird down have been found in some Viking graves. Also, their clothes were much more colorful than we can imagine. Some were decorated with embroidery and quite bright colors. Thank you for embarking on this epic journey through Viking history with us today. We hope you enjoyed discovering these incredible facts and learning more about the fascinating world of the Vikings. If you found this video enlightening, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to Fact Frenzy for more captivating content. Remember, knowledge is the greatest treasure, so don't miss out on our future explorations into the realms of history, science, and beyond. Until next time, may your adventures be as legendary as the Vikings themselves.